Our next speaker is Dr. Ajit Sapre. Ajit is the Group President, Research and Development at Reliance Industries, and so he leads all of our research efforts in our existing technology platforms of refining and petrochemicals, and he also leads our frontier research group where we're working on breakthrough technologies in a wide variety of areas. He has over 30 years of experience in refining and petrochemicals. He holds 25 patents, has a bachelor's degree from ICT in Mumbai, PhD in chemical engineering from University of Delaware, and an MBA in Cornell. I'm happy to say that I work for Dr. Sapre, and I'm even more happy to count him among my friends. Ajit?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see all of you here because I thought after yesterday's long day and maybe it was the Mumbai Indians who won and we're #1 on the chart, so it must have motivated you to be here. So we're really excited about it. Anyway, I think I was asked to give a perspective from Reliance, but I think I say maybe in one Indian perspective because, again, this is probably my perspective. And although it has some color from the Reliance Industries, it's probably more to do with what I think we need to do. Yesterday was about Gandhian engineering. And in the evening, Kirit talked about on a broader way of what the needs of India are. And I want to kind of build on that because I think that's really the place I want to come back because the affordable excellence is a theme that we started with. And obviously it's critical, but let's not lose focus of a broader picture. It's kind of an outline of my talk. I'll kind of run through very quickly because some of this is very similar to what I presented in Stanford before. But I think one of the themes that I'm going to talk about is that a lot of the old technologies which were probably invented during World War I and II can be revisited because of modern technology, and that can be actually made to be far more efficient and robust. And that's something you will see along with some high frontiers in biotechnology. I mean, I do believe this is a century of biology. And what can biology do for us, really a question. And so I think there's like a two-part, and you will see there's like a day and night difference. In the beginning, I'll talk about all the old stuff that needs to be rejuvenated. And there's a promise to do that. And some new stuff that may bring us to meeting the quality of energy that we need to supply to the masses, okay? Now, I think this is something you know. The economic gravity of the world is shifting to the east. The volatile crude oil and climate change concerns are pushing the green agenda. But the real question is that is it the energy security or sustainability or the sustainability that is going to drive this? And in my mind, probably it's the energy security that is going to drive this more and more. And actually, as we talked about yesterday, again, the emergence of shale gas and other hydrocarbons, would they become a bridge to this green promise, or would this green promise remain a distant possibility? And here again, the technology could change the way the new technologies could get into the energy sector. This is the same picture that Dr. Mashelkar showed, but it's somewhat different. It shows the entire world. And what this is a night shot from the NASA spacecraft, and the intensity of light shows the regions of prosperity. The darkness shows where the poor 3+ billion people live. The aspirations of growing middle class are tied to access to power, mobility, standard of living, and clearly this is what we need to look at. From the Indian perspective, we have about 5% affluent, 45% middle class, but most importantly, the 50% strugglers who really want to climb the prosperity ladder. And that's the Gandhian engineering that we were discussing yesterday. But let's not forget the other 45% as well. And I think from my perspective, this is something I began yesterday. If you look at the energy demand versus the GDP per capita curve and the OECD or the rich countries, which is 17% of the world population, at the top, and as the economic growth goes into more into what I would call service-oriented business, then the incremental energy needed is much lower. And the OECD countries have already gone through the urbanization phase. When I look at India, which is very low on the left-hand side of this corner, and as the industrialization begins, are we going to follow the same path? And if we do, it's clearly, and I know India is actually lower than the average world population. So if we look at the world population, if it were to follow this curve, we'll exhaust all resources on Earth. Not just energy, water, air quality, whole variety of things. So to me, the challenge really is to develop a more secure and responsible energy technologies for the growing world. And we need to look at leapfrogging developments in this whole sector. So I urge you to think about this sort of a curve and what is it we need to do. It's just the energy efficiency we talked about where OECD and others can come down on the curve. But for the new entrants into the energy, we need to think about it, say, what is it we need to do so we are not following what was done in the past. We talked about shale gas, and I won't dwell about it. The point I'm trying to make here is that, if you think about the oil and gas, it's been around for more than 100 years. We've been drilling holes in the ground and pumping hydrocarbons. And if you think about it, it's the technology that actually made the old shale rock so much more easy to access and get access to energy. So it's the continuous focus on technology development, even on the old things, can make things viable. And I want to leave that point with you in the next few, I want to make this point more strongly on the next few slides. This chart shows that the shale gas is actually making a remarkable impact in the coal in the US. It is replacing a large amount of coal in the power sector. And in fact, since India does import coal, maybe it's about time we can start importing good quality coal from the US. The coal provides about 25% of the global primary energy needs and generates about 40% of the world's electricity. Coal contributes more than 50% of the Indian energy mix, and that remains constant even if you look in the outer years. And the absolute amount, it will be growing, but the percent-wise, it remains about the same. And the energy security demand will continue to have India rely on coal. And coal is an important resource, as we heard from Dr. Parikh yesterday. And so the real challenge is that how do we look at clean coal? And I think that's something I do want to talk about in next few slides. And I guess if you look at the challenges faced by the coal industry, Dr. Parikh did talk about a few of these yesterday. And here's a list of all kinds of challenges that we are facing in power generation in India. Our power plants are exclusively pulverized coal with efficiency in mid-30s. CapEx and load factor considerations have been more important in the past than the efficiency, if you will. And there are reliability challenges due to boiler tube failure as a result of abrasive quartz in our high ash coals. To improve thermal efficiency, we clearly need to employ supercritical technology that Dr. Parikh talked about yesterday. But the challenge is, how do you do that for our indigenous coal with a very high ash content? This is not a problem that is solved in my mind. Probably we can hear from Tata Power and others. And actually, the BHEL and NTPC and others are working quite actively on this. And at least for the supercritical technology, they do have something that will get commercialized very soon. In my personal opinion, with a more than 38% high ash content and also pretty deep seams of coal, it doesn't make sense to bring it above ground. If you think about it, even the worst coal in the US only has about 12% ash. So keep that in perspective. So it kind of makes sense to think about underground coal gasification. We have one of the experts here, sitting right here. Obviously, this is the kind of technology we need to think about. If you think about it, it also upgrades the hydrogen content of the syngas and the gas that you're bringing out. The other really is the bioroute for coal gasification. Can you stimulate coal seams or coal bed methane activity with the bugs that can chew up and produce more gas? Another promising technology. There are quite a few pilots going on in India We need to kind of accelerate that to commercialization. The gasification is clearly at the heart of what we're doing in Reliance. We're going to build 12 of the largest gasifiers ever built here in Jamnagar, and we're going to gasify all of our petroleum coke and make this refinery bottomless. The objective here is that we're going to make syngas, which is going to be more cost competitive than the $15 million BTU imported natural gas. That's the driver. So clearly, the ability to convert syngas to other things is of critical importance from my perspective. And I think that brings me to the other area, which is probably a neglected area, which is coal liquefaction. You can convert coal either directly or indirectly. And actually, I was thinking about it yesterday night of what Sally said, and it just occurred to me. This is something I do need to talk about. You can convert syngas either through Fischer-Tropsch and upgrade that to primarily diesel, which is the primary growth in this part of the world. This is the diesel market. Or you can convert through methanol to gasoline. Now, yesterday we did talk about biomass gasification, and we talked about distributed generation. I want to come back to that point. But I think the key here is that with some of the technologies that are happening today, can we make this Fischer-Tropsch plant on a much smaller scale? And the process intensification, the kind of new reactors we're looking at, this is possible. So you can make a small distributed Fischer-Tropsch plant economically available if the technology improves further. The other thing I want to talk about was really about DME. DME, I mean, if you think about Indian market, we both, LPG and diesel is a large import in India. And if you think about converting coal and syngas to dimethyl ether, it can substitute in both the LPG markets as well as the diesel market. DME is a very clean burning fuel in the diesel, and as well as if you look at the LPG, without any change in the infrastructure or distribution system, you can easily accommodate about 15%. Obviously, the technical improvements would allow us to, in fact, make these diesel engines far more efficient with DME. And the DME technology itself is kind of languishing. There's a, single stage and double stage technologies, but in my mind, there's a significant opportunity to further improve this whole technology. And if you think about Indian coals in particular, we have a very large amount of lignite. And if you think about lignite, what can we do with it? It certainly has a much higher hydrogen content. And I think in my mind, what is shown here is the atomic hydrogen to carbon ratio and oxygen to carbon ratio. And if you think about lignite, where it is in compared to biomass and the pet coke, anthracite and coal, it's really in the middle. And if you think about, I heard yesterday that there's a lot of talk about solar hydrogen. And if you really want to make a good use of this resource like coal, why not combine the hydrogen from solar and upgrade this lignite coal with, say, resid in the refinery to make diesel? Because at the end of the day, it's the diesel, which is a far more efficient transportation sector fuel than anything else. It's not ethanol, it's not petrol, it's diesel and high compression engine. And so how do I make use of more diesel from a resource we have? And this is one idea probably we can think about and say, is it time for us to look at technologies that we can actually improve? Now, if you think about coal liquefaction has been around, and this is like a World War I, II technology, but not much has changed. And I'll appeal to you the nanotechnology and some of the improvements in catalyst technology and the reactor technology that are going on today, and the new science that we can bring in. We can bring in the new and the old science to make some of these things viable. At the end of the day, we do want to make a liquid fuel that will go to sustain our current infrastructure for the mobility. Now, I want to switch gears and talk about a different area, and this is about biotechnology. And before I get into that, I do want to talk about the distributed generation and distributed consumption, because I have a feeling this is a reality for the electrical sector for a whole variety of reasons. The smart grid technology, we're talking about distributing natural gas and then producing electricity locally. And this kind of shows that that approach is far more efficient than centralized power and then trying to move electrons around. Now, can that be done for liquid fuels? And as you heard, the Indian economy is still agrarian. I mean, we are more than 58% dependent on the land. And, we talked quite a bit about this cooking stove, with less than 10% efficiency, and with modern stove becoming maybe a bit more than 30%. Obviously, this biomass can be used far more effectively, not only to to provide the cooking, but also surplus biomass, perhaps the agricultural waste that we were talking about, could that be converted to liquid fuels and chemicals? And if we really need to do that, we do need to think about how do I make the distributed production and distributed consumption work. There are some thinkers who think about that the hydrocarbons are going to be a history pretty soon. And if you look at the long history of the mankind, maybe the hydrocarbons are a blip. And some believe that we'll go back to biomass. And biomass, in my mind, if we really have to make this picture a reality, a lot has to change. What has happened in the U.S., the U.S. agricultural policy basically drove energy policy in my mind, and making ethanol from corn was a really terrible idea. The first generation ethanol, in my mind, is absurd. This is not something you want to put ethanol into your gasoline, which only has less than 67% of the energy, and pay the same price. As a consumer, I mean, to me, it's a terrible idea. And even as a, in my mind, if at all you want to make something, make ethanol from cellulosic, it may be permissible. But I think I would rather make a much higher density fuel rather than trying to put ethanol into gasoline. Again, it's my personal perspective, not of Reliance Industries. If ethanol is mandated by the government, we will make ethanol and put it in. But as a consumer, it makes no sense. And as everyone knows, for every 1% increase in food price, 16 million people go hungry. And the agricultural policies of many parts of the world have actually made the poor not have enough food. And I'm not so sure this whole question shows up that just because a few people want to drive around, you want to make others go hungry. I guess that's kind of an interesting cartoon. It's for the first time in the history of mankind, in my mind, if you look at the price of oil and price of food, is about the same. And what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the price on an energy content basis. And in my mind, this is the way to look at everything. Because if you're going to price energy, let's price energy based on energy content or whatever feedstock that you have. And what this cartoon says is that really, maybe the biofuels is a terrible idea, because if I were to put a big windmill on the same piece of land where I was going to produce biomass, it's far more efficient and far more cost effective to do that. Now, obviously, having said that, that kind of says, maybe, what are the challenges that I need to solve? And maybe that's the next couple of slides I'm going to show. If you look at the energy content and the material cost, I did make this point that if you look at the natural gas and oil and all these different various feedstock, the biomass has to be at cost less than on this line. And so the biomass shown here is okay, less than $50 a ton. If it's more than $50 a ton, it makes no sense to convert all that biomass to anything, because I had to put some additional cost to make it useful. And the agricultural waste we were talking about is probably something in the Indian context we need to think about. But the other problem we have to look at it is that one large-scale refinery is equivalent to about 90 biorefineries. And at today's technology, it's going to cost us 3 times more. So here's a challenge, a technology challenge to say, how do I make these distributed processes far more efficient? I mean, the biggest challenge really is the energy density, as this picture shows. Even the worst producing oil well in the US, Gulf Coast, Texas, that is shown here, which is far more productive from the aerial productivity basis. If you look at any of the Saudi Arabian oil well, probably that chart will go out of this room. So the real challenge is that how do you make any of these biomaterials competitive from a cost perspective? And, are the land-based biomass the way to go? And I think that's another challenge. This is the challenge about the scale and the multiplicity of different feedstock, because the biomass is going to be heterogeneous. And yesterday there was a talk about how do you make this standardized? We were talking about Europeans making a standard pellets, making it easy to use. The biomass by itself in the Indian context is extremely heterogeneous. The one that is agricultural waste, then how am I going to use it? And I think that really poses a question, do we need to look at the land-based biomass? We do have a fairly long coastline. How about if we make that biomass in the sea or along the land where it is already salt ingress has created a problem? We don't have the luxury like the US or Australia where they can grow energy crops with the kind of landmass that they have. And I guess, how do you make the feedstock agnostic? Because at the end of the day, if I'm going to build a plant, I want the output to be constant And the biomass by its very nature, it is seasonal, it's changing, it's different types. And maybe if you convert that to syngas and convert syngas to something useful, that may at least change the variability of what is coming into the plant. And I'm showing, maybe you can use sugars and convert sugars to fermentation to various products. And probably only the chemicals is what really makes sense. I'm not so sure fermentation technology to make fuels today, other than my friend here talked about cellulosic ethanol, is really going to be competitive. Maybe butanol or some other higher calorific value products could be. Or maybe syngas fermentation itself is another possibility. And I truly believe this is a century of synthetic biology, and I'm optimistic that the synthetic biology may allow us to improve yields, maybe make these products available on a wasteland using just the red fed. If I can increase the productivity of a biomass on a land-based basis, just red fed with wasteland, land that is not useful for food, then there's a promise. And I guess, in my opinion, another potential is really converting sunlight and CO2 with seawater. And say maybe could algae play a role in this context? And there's something to think about. And again, the solution here may lie, in my opinion, in scaling up the biology. Then a lot of work is going on in metabolic engineering and synthetic pathway. And in controlled conditions in fermentation, we have done some remarkable things. Can that be done in a photosynthetic way? In the external vagaries of sunlight is really the challenge. And how would you make nanotechnology scale? And what would you make? I think yesterday there was a discussion about C3, C4 plants. What we really ideally need is something in between. And, can we really change the photosynthesis? Can we have metabolic engineering change? Can we really work on the PS1, PS2? In my mind, we don't understand photosynthesis as well as we should. We don't understand at a fundamental level to make an impact for it change, because it has evolved over billions of years. And although we think that we have control over biology, we don't have enough control and understanding to really change it. If we can make the circadian cycle go away, at least make it mimic that it doesn't understand, probably we have a chance to make biomass work for fuels. And I guess, this aggregation and intermediate collection and processing of biomass was discussed at length yesterday. But the real challenge in my mind is that the amount of R&D that has gone into process intensification for our World War I and II technologies. I'm going to take 5 more minutes because I'm almost coming to an end. But I think those are the kinds of things we need to think about. Can I rejuvenate the old technologies with modern science? Can I use the nanotechnology? Can I use the understanding at the molecular level? Can I use the atomistic understanding? And can I make those things available so I can meet the promise to provide energy to a greater world? I think those are the challenges in front of science. The other point I really want to talk about is that the energy technologies are very different from other technologies. And I'm trying to make this point here. It's not just the development of technology that matters. To make an impact on society is the deployment of the technology. The application of technology is just as critical. And I guess the energy technologies by very nature are slow in development. They're irreversible in nature. They have a high capital cost. Unlike IT and communications, which we are all enjoying tremendous benefits from. I mean, just think about it. The next version of Windows or whatever, Google, you can download for millions of people in a day. I cannot do that for energy technology. I need to build infrastructure. I need to move something. Unless, some of the things visionary people talk about can happen where I can move the energy like we were talking about yesterday of electrifying the cars as they're driving. If those technologies where I can wirelessly transfer energy, that's the challenge. And can biotechnology for some reason, which direction would it go? Would it go more in the old ways or would it go more in terms of the IT and communications? I don't know. But this is the challenges for the science to think about and say, how am I going to improve this so that probably I can overcome this particular paradigm. What is shown here is the last 300 years of what has happened in energy technologies in terms of penetration to make a significant impact. And here the significant impact is nothing but 3% penetration in a given sector. And what this shows is it takes 3 decades for any energy, new energy, to show up more than 3% in the mix. And so if this is the challenge, and how are we going to do that? And then that's something I would let the scientists and engineers to worry about. And I think, these are my last 2 slides. This is a slide about a summary. I kind of rambled on various things, but I thought I'll bring it back because I think one of the challenges that Sally said is that what are the things that from the Indian perspective you're looking at? Now, coal to us is an important resource, and so I'm listed here. Things that we should be looking at is the underground coal gasification or a bioconversion of coal. And also yesterday, Kirit talked about carbon capture and sequestration if you're going to use coal. I talked about ultra supercritical technologies for high ash coals. I mentioned about the dimethyl ether and can we make the coal liquefaction with modern technology more efficient. The solar mission, and a lot has been talked about solar, so I won't talk about it. The green mission we talked about, and I think here again in the Indian context is only the agro residues that probably are worth thinking about or looking at going in the sea rather than on the land for biomass. And obviously, if you're going to talk about any of these intermittent technologies, we need to think about the robust storage technologies. This is going to be critical no matter where you are in the world. And especially as you go off-grid and you talk about these distributed mini-grids, the storage will be an important element. And let's not forget the energy efficiency. Whatever we can do to make energy efficiency, that kind of makes sense. I mean, the existing infrastructure, I can make it more efficient to work. That's, a dollar saved is dollar earned, right? It's the same thing. Again, the recycle and reuse technology, there was not much talk about. But it's not just the energy, right? The energy goes into materials goes into what we actually do for our well-being. And so anything you can recycle, you can reuse. To that extent, the net input to the system is less. And there's a lot of this the system level thinking. And this is something I think we have not put enough effort from a science perspective to say, how do I recycle more effectively? How do I reuse the materials? And that will also reduce. And obviously, there's a lot of discussion about the new business models. And I truly believe if I can look at the distributed production and distributed consumption, make it economically viable, then a lot of things can be game-changing. This is my last slide. I think we started with Gandhian engineering, and it was actually an inclusive innovation. This is what the theme of yesterday was. And to me, it's really matching the creativity with execution. And the science is all about creativity. I mean, when we talk about universities and the national labs, I mean, that's what they excel. We industry really focus on execution. We more worry about the raw material flexibility, the capex efficiency, opex efficiency. Obviously, we need to work together. We do need to look at some creative business models. Look at the innovation in a way in which you can make the change to meet the aspiring middle class. And I guess in my mind, the collective mandate for all of us is really the science for solution, technology for transformation, and innovation for impact. And I think with that, let me come back. I think we started with Gandhian engineering. And I think yesterday what the culmination of was really that we need to drive the science such that we can think about affordable excellence. Because that does open up opportunities at all levels for everyone in the world. So actually the science, a lot of it is really new science and you're trying to find an application. I think there's a lot of discussion about, okay, here are the needs of the people. How do I take this science to solve the needs? And how do you make it affordable? I think that's probably the key theme from my perspective of what we've been talking about. So it's not that we don't need high science. It's not that we have all the science we need so we can apply. We do need that new science. We do need the scientists to focus on what are the problems that need to be solved. And, why just reduce the PV cost by 10%? Why not by a factor of 100? Why not take a challenge? If I can take that challenge and make science work for it, maybe we can solve a lot of problems. So thanks. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Ajit. So we have time for a couple questions. Yes.
So work on producing kerosene from agriculture residues, I think that will solve a lot of problems. And I'm sure that this conversion of agriculture residues into liquid fuels should be on distributed basis, should be a very major project.
Clearly, that's what I was talking about is mini Fischer-Tropsch plants. And I'm talking about more, a better quality, maybe diesel rather than just pure kerosene, if you will. And I think the process intensification and these new generation reactors, if you will, these are actually microchannel reactors. And these microchannel reactors are actually reducing the size of the equipment by a factor of 50 to 100. And if you can make these nanotechnology, new catalysts far more active. And if you use these newer concepts of reactor and eliminate the byproduct so there's no recycle, then the equipment can be very, very small and efficient. And then you can get out of this CapEx, OpEx that I need a scale, because our old paradigm has always been I need a scale to get the economics. And if I can break that paradigm with new technology, then a lot of these things could happen.
Okay. Any others? Yes.
I have a question. The last 1 decade, we've seen the cost of biomass, coal, and crude oil or furnace oil, which is used more from an industrial perspective, grow at the same rate. If you look at 10 years ago or a decade ago, the cost of furnace oil was probably 1.5 rupees per 1,000 kilocalories, cost of energy. Biomass was about 33 paisa per 1,000 kilocalories. Even globally, you see the coal prices follow crude oil prices. The change has been that the efficiency in conversion of biomass or coal to energy, usable energy, the efficiency has gone up by about 15%. So the earlier the gap was about 20%, now the gap is about 5 to 8% in conversion. So it would make more sense. I mean, if we've heard yesterday, we've heard today that there's a limitation in how much biomass energy potential is there given the land available and the pressure on food and the output that will be required. So is there any way of actually bringing down the cost of the crude and the furnace oil itself or the oil itself to make it more cheaper and reduce this gap? Because the gap has remained constant. It hasn't changed from an energy cost perspective.
Actually, that is not true. I think, maybe there's one point I showed you. In the US, for example, the gas, natural gas and crude oil are completely decoupled. Right? There's a big arbitrage between the natural gas and crude oil. When natural gas is selling at $2 a million BTU, on equivalent energy basis, you should be close to 15, 20. And that's why when it comes to India, it is $15 a million BTU, because you don't have gas and you're relying on Middle East oil. In my mind, the oil pricing has nothing to do with it. It's a supply and demand. How do the economies of Middle East balance their economies decides the crude price. It has very little to do with anything else in the world. That's my opinion, by the way, So I think the point is the crude oil price can be stabilized at any point you want. But that's not the issue. Compared to, if you think about the biomass, the reason the biomass pricing is the way it is the transportation of biomass is a big component of delivering the biomass somewhere else. And so the point we need to decouple is that if I can make a lot of biomass far more cheaply, then there's an ability to decouple it from what is it that you need to use it for transporting, right? And no, but I think what I'm trying to say is that, why are you looking at the land-based biomass? Why don't you look at the sea-based biomass? That may decouple your thinking about how to make biomass, make available at a much larger quantities, probably cheaper.
Okay, one more question, all the way in the back.
Excuse. Shall I ask? Okay, can I ask, sir?
Please.
When we're talking about technologies, in the past we have looked at cogeneration and things like that, right? So why is it not possible to actually look at multiple technologies rather than focusing on single technologies? Most of these solutions are like, why not look at biomass? Why not look at solar? Why can't we look at combinations of biomass and solar? Why can't we look at combinations of solar with hydro or solar with wind? That way we might also be looking at efficiencies that are better. And we might have a better capability of, better energy security for that matter.
No, that's a good point. I think from an energy security perspective, all these energies will play a role. It is not one energy technology going to dominate or the other. I just wanted to focus on things that were not discussed yesterday. And that's the only reason I picked two. I could have picked any other two, but I chose to pick coal and biomass because I thought on coal, nothing was spoken, and coal is the largest resource we have, and we need to do something about it. So I wanted to talk about coal. And biomass, I have an entirely different perspective, and I believe the synthetic biology has a major role to play in way in which we can look at biomass for chemicals and energy. But you're very right. We need to look at the whole range of things. In fact, that's the reason I was talking about, if I have a coal and I want to put hydrogen in it, why not I combine with the solar hydrogen that was being discussed yesterday? In fact, there are technologies today in the US where they're actually talking about upgrading biomass with solar hydrogen. And I think to me, a coal probably is a much better choice than talking about biomass upgradation with solar hydrogen. Yeah, sure. Polygeneration and hybrid. Polygeneration and hybrid is a common theme everywhere. So it is being used as a result, not being discussed because it's quite a bit used in that way. So.
Okay, and one more question all the way in the back.
Sir, we have been talking about US shale gas as a game changer. Would like to have your views on this methane hydrate, which recently was in news as fire ice. What are your views and how would it affect? Would it be another game changer in the global energy landscape?
That's an excellent point. Actually, the Japanese have said that after decades of work, they feel they're successful in, at least at a pilot level, to convert methane hydrates in a way in which they can control it. The methane hydrate, the challenge has always been, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have Sally right here, that can you do it in a controlled way and not create unintended consequences. Here again, the science and technology has a significant role to play. If we can harness the methane hydrates in a controlled commercial way, that's going to be another game changer for sure. And it's actually going to boil down to is really the fugitive emissions. And I think Lynn mentioned that we do have technologies to make sure methane fugitive emissions and its carbon forcing potential doesn't really impact the global climate change issues. If you can do that, obviously the methane from hydrates would be another big source of energy.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ajit.